I think we're live.
I think we're live. Yeah, guys. Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. This is a rare treat for me. This is Perry Carpenter. I'm the Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer for KnowBe4, and I'm joined today by Kevin Mitnick, who is our Chief Hacking Officer and Hacker Extraordinaire. So, Kevin, why don't you say hi so everybody gets a taste of your voice?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm glad everybody took the time to join our webinar today. And it's really exciting because I'm kind of nervous because this is like actually the first time that Perry and I have done a webinar before. But what's really cool is Perry and I share a love for magic. And magic is what really brought me into the world of hacking and phone phreaking back in the early days. So it's kind of really cool. Well, it is really cool to be on this webinar with a fellow magician. So I'm really excited. Yeah.
I look forward to it. So we've had several discussions over the years just on the fact that all of these things map together because there's the same psychology involved in how deception works, how people's brains can be made to take shortcuts, and how we use all these things that are very good strengths that come with being human, but they can be turned on their head by somebody that's got the appropriate skill set. So just a quick note as we get into it. You'll notice if you're on the audience side of this that today's webinar is a little bit different than a normal webinar. We're running this more as a discussion or as kind of an interactive webinar where there's not going to be a lot of slides. There's not a lot of visual eye candy, though I did put some general categories of slides so that your brain has something other than our voices to focus on here and there. But don't expect this to be visually stimulating like a normal webinar. This is really about content and about discussion and idea sharing. And the main idea that we're going to be talking about today is deception. So here's the obligatory Sun Tzu quote, is that all warfare is based on deception. And that's why we've got Kevin with us. Kevin is really somebody who within our industry is an authority on this topic of deception and has proven himself over 30 years as being somebody that we can look to, somebody that we can get advice from, and somebody that can talk about the future of how deception is going to be used in society through hacking techniques and all the new things that are fun and scary to talk about. So, Kevin, as we get into this, I do have a few questions that I'd love to ask you.
Sure.
Your story has been spoken of for a long time in the media, both positively and negatively, but there's probably a section of the audience who is not familiar with you or who has only heard some of the periphery of who you are and what you're about. So in your own words for a few minutes, why don't you just kind of give a summary of what brought you to where you are and some of your passions and some of the things that really get you worked up about social engineering and hacking.
Yeah, sure. Earlier I mentioned that, I had this really love of magic since I was, a preteen, and it got me into this hobby called phone phreaking. And phone phreaking is kind of like the predecessor to computer hacking. And a kid in high school actually showed me all these tricks he could do with the phone, and I was really taken aback. I go, this is so cool. I want to learn everything about the phone company. And I was kind of a prankster as well at the time, so I liked to pull pranks using the phone system. And kind of one of my favorites that's very well known is I used to change my friend's home phone to a payphone, so whenever his parents tried to make a call, they'd say, please deposit 25 cents, amongst many other pranks. And then I became interested in computers really for the control I would have over the phone company to better pull these pranks. So it kind of started in that way. And that's where I kind of was introduced to this topic of social engineering, is back in the 70s as a phone phreaker. What we need to do is learn all about the phone company and be able to call personnel at the phone company and convince them to do certain things. So we have to learn all the terminology, the lingo. Kind of we had to understand how the business operated more in depth than a phone company employee, so we can really pass ourselves off as one of them and then be able to deceive them into doing things for us. Like, for example, giving us information on a subscriber, or giving us enough information to access a phone company switch. So a lot of my social engineering experience really stemmed from this hobby of phone phreaking, and then it led into computers. And history has been told, and this spanned over a 30-year period of using social engineering techniques. First, when I was on the other side as a black hat of breaking into systems, we'd use a combination of technical exploitation and social engineering, of course. Usually social engineering to get the foot in the door, then technical exploitation once you're inside the target. And, over these years, just have, spent a lot of time focused on this particular area, because social engineering is an extremely effective way that a threat actor could break into a target. And we see that even today. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's
started, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting to me, because when I think about the mindset of an attacker, or somebody that's really interested in social engineering or hacking in general, it does start with that love of puzzles a lot, and the love of magic that you already talked about. But when you flash back to the phone phreaking days, part of your part of what you were having to do at that point was be more social and engaging, because you had to do everything over the phone or more physically than people that are brought up just behind a keyboard today. So I wonder if that almost gave you an advantage as things started to get more technological, and where you were able to be in a combination of behind a keyboard plus on the phone doing pretexting and the things that people typically struggle with more today.
Yeah, I think it was a distinct advantage. In fact, today I think phone pretexting works extremely well, and I don't think a lot of businesses are aware of this technique or adequately protect their enterprise from these type of social engineering attacks. But yeah, most definitely so. Being using a combination of being behind the computer and being able to effectively come up with a story or a pretext that would seem so normal to the target in their normal course of business that they would just, simply fall for it. So it's really using deception, taking the idea, as a young kid, I was interested in deception more for magic, and taking it forward to, the 1970s, when I was interested in exploring the telephone network and pulling pranks for fun. This was never for profit or to cause harm, but I needed, to basically convince phone company personnel to kind of, act on my behalf, whether it was, whether they would access a computer or give me information and that sort of thing. And I became very adept at this. And then when it led into, compromising computer systems back in the 80s and 90s, it was an extremely effective technique.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you did hit a little bit on your motivation back in the day, which was really just trying to see what was possible out there and to have fun. When you think about the attacks that most of the organizations that are represented on the call today are interested in or trying to defend again, what do you see as the motivation behind the attackers that are really out there trying to penetrate the corporate networks of today?
Well, pretty much fraud, theft and fraud, I think, is the number one. Threat actors wanting to break into the enterprise, deploy ransomware, and essentially profit. Of course, there are different motivations behind these attacks. You have hacktivists that might want to break into your organization because they don't like what you're doing and they want to send a message. You might have nation states attack you because you're working on, developing GSM cards, which are placed in cell phones, so they want to get the crypto keys and this sort of thing. But to me, doesn't really matter, right? I don't really care about the motivation of the attacker, except when it goes to thinking about what level of effort they will go to. Like, I think a hacktivist will go to, or an insider who's really upset with the company for some reason, will exert more effort to compromise the business than a fraudster, because a fraudster is really going to go after the low-hanging fruit,
Right.
because they just want to profit. They just want to make money. They want to make it easy for themselves. So
Yeah.
really go after the low-hanging fruit. But on the other side of the coin, the hacktivist, the disgruntled insider might spend more effort to attack you. So I think it's important with that respect. But to me, it doesn't matter what the motivation is, because regardless, I want to protect myself from getting compromised.
Yeah. Well, let's peel that back for a second, though. So, from your perspective, there's a lot that doesn't matter because it's all about protecting the enterprise. We had a couple questions come in before the session today, and then also coming in now, that are asking questions about, well, what if I'm a small company? Do I still have to worry about it? And I think you just teased that out a little bit, because you did say that there are different motivations. One of those is crime and fraud. Another one might be a disgruntled insider. Other ones could be nation state attacks and intellectual property theft. So even for these small enterprises, there's a lot. If you have a business in general, there's something that needs to be protected. There's something of value that's there. And depending on the type of people that you've employed or the type of people that are on the outside, there will be a motivation to get in because you do have something of value. And so I think for those people that are small organizations that are saying, why would somebody want me? If you answer the question of why you exist in the first place, then you'll probably be able to answer that.
And there's another reason. I mean, you might be a small business and you might be the low-hanging fruit, and an attacker wants to attack your business so they could basically use your computer systems to attack another target. So basically to store data in your infrastructure, or to leverage your machines to attack a third party. There's many different reasons why an attacker might choose to attack you, even though you don't think you're in the business of selling rockets, so you're not so interesting. It really doesn't matter, because don't forget, if it's a fraudster and you're the low-hanging fruit, they're definitely going to want to attack you, even deploy ransomware, because it's just so easy and they could profit. So
right.
So no matter what type of business you are, even a consumer, it could be potentially victimized. So consumer, small business, enterprise, pretty much everybody's a target. I don't think attackers distinguish between what type of business you are, unless they're doing a targeted attack to try to, steal a particular type of information, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So we started to kind of move in this area of the general reasons and motivations and purposes behind social engineering. Why don't you talk a little bit, and this comes directly from a question that we received, who's most susceptible in an organization? Is it the C-level executives, the call center, the marketing department? And is there really a difference?
It's everybody. Of course, when we're doing ethical hacking and attacking a business, we don't go directly after IT, because these individuals should know better. They should be more security aware. And don't forget, all we really need is to get our foot in the door of the business. So I was working on a security assessment actually this year. And what we did is we developed a phishing attack that was extremely simple. It was basically, this company used Outlook 365. So we sent, we actually did a little, we did our, what we call our OSINT research, which we'll get to in a bit. And we found that that the client used Office 365 amongst other things, but we're able to get a few employees that we wanted to target. So we basically sent out a slow fish, not sending, maybe I think 2 or 3 people. And what this attack did, it was twofold. First of all, it would try to steal the person's credentials if they were foolish enough to enter it into the form, right? So we call this credential harvesting. The second thing, even if they just opened up the email, it had an embedded UNC link. So if they allowed outgoing connections on certain ports, like 139 or 445, what we call NetBIOS, or over SMB, what it would do is if they were still using SMB version 1, what it would do is actually send their hash. So just by opening up the email, we'd get their hash that we could crack offline. But in this one instance, it was hilarious because nobody fell for the fish. right? And and we sent out like 4 or 5 emails. Eventually, we did the first 2 or 3, then we did 4 or 5, and then somebody filled out the web form, put in the username field, "I'm not going to be a fool," and in the password field, "I'm not going to be a fool," right? But what they did is they actually fired off our payload that we had, even though they filled out the form, and we actually, ended up getting access to this person's machine who happened to be the CEO of the company and had domain administrator rights.
Oh.
So, yeah, and it was like, the attack, one of my security engineers actually carried out this attack, and it was just simply amazing that somebody would realize this is a fish and actually fire off the payload, and we compromised that person's machine anyway. So it was actually quite a surprise. So I would say, that in this particular case, the person was somewhat security aware, but again, fell for the attack.
Yeah. And that's simple browser-based vulnerabilities, I guess. The fact that they were interacting with it all.
Yeah, it's basically a human factor, right?
Yeah.
Because when an attacker or a security tester is going to test your enterprise or your small business, the first thing they're going to usually go do is a phishing attack, because it's so simple, so likely to succeed, because now you're targeting the individual, right? And sophisticated attackers will do a lot of research to find out who is the best individual to attack, and develop the attack so it seems so ordinary in the course of business, so usual, what they usually do, which doesn't seem out of the ordinary, that they just simply fall for it. And I think they fall for it because they're simply not aware of the scam. When people become aware of the scam, they go, aha, this seems to be suspicious, and they may not fall for it. But when people aren't aware of this type of methodologies that people use to break into their systems, then they become they become the victim.
Right.
And with the hacker mindset, right? Hackers, in my eye, to really do a full analysis of their target and think about what situation, what pretext can they set up that person's going to likely fall for, and then they executing the phishing attack or doing a pretext phone call. That's usually the easy part. It's actually coming up with the research and a good enough story to get the target to comply. That's the harder part.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I think there was another question that came in that is asking, in your opinion, what makes social engineering so lethal? I think you started to touch on that. Is there anything that you want to expand to just provide perspective on why it's so effective and why it works and where it can lead?
Well, we hear today, the DNC. The DNC was compromised through John Podesta's Gmail account. Was compromised allegedly by the Russians through a phishing attack. So I think that really, really speaks to the seriousness of these types of attacks. But I really think, besides phishing, I really think phone pretexting is something you really have to think about. And how these sophisticated attackers do it is they kind of build a trust sandwich. So usually people remember a phone call from from the beginning and the end. So what the attacker will do is ask innocuous questions in the beginning of the call. And that way it gauges the person's likeliness to cooperate, gauges their suspicion level, gauges whether they're going to really verify who they're talking to, because that's, really gaining the rapport, so to speak. And then the attacker then will go to more sensitive stuff, like asking for information, asking the person to do something on their computer, like simply visit a website that could be hosting malware, clicking on a link, clicking on a Java applet, this sort of thing. And then they'll follow it up with more innocuous questions. So basically, what people seem to remember is the beginning and end, and not necessarily the middle.
Right.
So this is kind of one of the techniques that phone pretexters use to carry out their attack, and makes it hard for the human to really do an analysis of what really happened there. for example, if somebody's in a mall and you're witnessing a crime, can you really describe, what color shirt the person has, what color hair, what type of shoes were they wearing? People don't really, really people don't think about that. And same thing when it comes to a phone call. They're really not, thinking about it. They're just being normal on the phone, and it works extremely well.
Well, let me draw another parallel back to the world of magic. As you know, one of the things that I do is this whole mentalism gig, which in a lot of ways is kind of acting like a fake psychic. And one of the things that's indicative within that world is this whole area of cold and hot reading, which is pretending to be able to read somebody's mind or situations within their life. And you see people do this all the time as they get people hooked with a few pieces that will gain some trust. They'll get them to open up about a piece of information, and then they'll actually claim credit for knowing that, and then start to make guesses at what may not be known. And what people start to remember is the times when those guesses are correct, and they don't remember the times that they're incorrect because of the whole nature of the conversation. And at the end of that 5 minutes, somebody will go, that person was amazing. They knew everything about me. When really you just hit on three things that were good guesses based on context, stage of life, and other statements that they had made. And I think that
elicitation.
Exactly. And it's the same thing, but in different types of life. One is social engineering for hacking purposes, and the other one is to do whatever these fake psychics are trying to do. Usually, just trying to scam somebody out of some money.
Yeah, one of my favorite elicitation techniques is where the victim corrects a wrong. So if you make a statement to a person trying to elicit information, and you give them a wrong information, like maybe talking to somebody in a company and saying, I understand you have a MacBook Pro, or on your MacBook Pro, blah 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 blah. No, I'm using a Windows machine, right? So if you state an incorrect statement, usually people will try to correct it, and that's a very effective elicitation tactic. There's so many of them out there, and where I think this elicitation and this phone pretexting, is scary today, at least that really businesses need to think about, is when the sophisticated threat actor is using both in combination. So they send a fish, right? And then, usually when someone receives an email, they have time to think about it. They might not get to it right away because they're busy doing other things. It's not such a priority. But imagine, someone at your company receiving a phishing attack, and then hours or even a day later, the attacker makes a call to that person to execute. So you're having kind of the dynamic of both the phishing and the phone pretexting together, and it gets the victim to act quickly, right? And even have more credibility behind the phishing attack if it's done well. And unfortunately, usually the target is going to fall for it hook, line, and sinker. So people have to think of the combination of these attacks that can be used. What's going on in the world? What's going on with your particular company that an attacker could learn about to leverage in the phishing attack, to leverage in the phone call, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. We had a question come in that I'm sure that everybody's going to have a different take on what the right answer is. But somebody's saying, is it possible to practice social engineering with honesty or specific morals still intact? If so, do you have any strategies for who might want to explore the social engineering space and maintain an air of honesty?
Well, I think social engineering is about deception, but I think every company that uses like simulated phishing or that does social engineering assessments to their own employees really needs to advise their staff that they do this type of testing from time to time. You don't let them know when exactly it's being done, and that way it doesn't people don't like to be fooled. They don't like to be deceived, so you don't want to reduce employee morale and that sort of thing. So that's where you're kind of being honest about, I think, that this attack happens from time to time. But when you're doing the attack, you have to be deceptive. But it reminds me back in my Black Hat years, is I was trying to win a radio contest at KFI in Los Angeles. And what they had were, they'd play a jingle on the radio, and they'd give you an 800 number to call. And if you can call that 800 number and be caller blah, 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 you could win the prize. So I was thinking, I said, I wanted to do this, win the prize, but I don't want to break the law, right? Because obviously, even though I was a hacker, I didn't want to break the law in this regard. So what I knew from my phone company knowledge, what number and what department that phone company employees would call to figure out what they call the POTS number. So every 800 number that you would call actually would translate to what they call a plain ordinary telephone service number. And if you could call on that number, you're not going to get choked off, when the radio stations say, oh, we only allow, 20 calls from Los Angeles, 20 calls from Orange County. You don't get choked off. So I was able, just by having knowledge of the number that was actually public, right? But people didn't know about it. I simply just called up and go, hi. They answer the phone. Hi, this is Kevin. I need the POTS number for 1-800-232-KRTH, right? I'm not lying. I'm not deceiving of who I am. And they simply just gave me the information, the POTS number. And through having knowledge of that, I was able to win the radio station contest because I didn't go through the choke. So in that particular case, I could say there was no dishonesty used, but it was the knowledge of how the phone company worked, right, and the knowledge of, how the system worked to kind of use deception in that regard. So it's really tough to be a social engineer when you're doing the attack, to do it in such a way that you're not being deceptive. What do you think about it, Perry? I mean, Can you think of a way where can you think of an alternative way where you could be completely honest with the individual that you're trying to deceive? You're trying to deceive the person into doing some course of action, and you're not using deception.
Well, I think you framed the question in a way that I can't answer it well, but let me give a take on what I think the person is trying to get to. This person seems like they struggle with the idea of lying or doing something that could be shady. Because they've got a moral code that they're trying to adhere to. I think the way that you started, the way that you did answer this at the very beginning, which is kind of having this honest dishonesty. We are doing this because there's a cause behind it. And so your moral code with this is doing the best thing for your organization. You're not trying to trick people to make them feel stupid or try to get them fired or anything else. You're trying to trick people to improve the overall security posture of your organization by showing where some of the issues are and then bringing some corrective information or corrective actions or behavior science into play. And so the way that I talk about this with organizations when I'm coaching them is your tone behind this is everything. And so your tone cannot be or should not be scolding or anything like that, not calling them stupid users, not calling them ineffective, and not giving them kind of a 3 strikes and you're out type of model. The tone that you use is more like a friend that's concerned or a parent that's concerned that wants to come alongside them for their own benefit and help them improve in something that's important for their life and the life of, I'll use the term loosely, the family, which is the organization here. So that's the way I think about it. And it helps me deal with what could otherwise be moral ambiguity and go in these situations. But your whole purpose is the right purpose. You're also being very upfront about the fact that you're using these deceptive tactics on people within the organization for the right reason as well. So you do have this very honest dishonesty. You're an honest liar in that situation. Why don't we go ahead?
Yeah, and I even when we're testing a client using, doing a social engineering assessment, I really try to keep the names of the people we were able to fool, out of the report as much as possible. And that's because we don't want that person punished, or, we don't want anything, negative to happen to an employee because they fell for this. We want it to be a teaching kind of a teaching experience. We want the next time, hopefully, that the same person receives a phishing attack or a pretext phone call to have that aha moment. We want it to be a very teachable moment, nothing that's negative in any such way.
Right.
So, with that said, I really think it's important to advise your staff that you do this testing, but not the exact date and time of the testing, so it doesn't, upset the corporate culture. But go on with your other question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's it's finance is stupid for clicking on the fish. It's Bob in finance is human and suffers from all the same human frailties that we all do, and that his brain can be hijacked without the right type of interventive training, or even with the right training, but in the wrong context or circumstance, he can still be taken advantage of in many ways.
Exactly.
All right. So
Exactly.
a lot of people are asking questions about if you've ever been hacked or social engineered. Do you have anything to tell us about situations where that may have happened?
Well, I was the fool. I mean, this happened, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago, is I received a Twitter phishing attack, and somebody sent me a direct message. I clicked on it on my iPhone, and I figured out my iPhone is running the latest iOS version, and it's not running like it on a desktop. So I figured out I'll just click and see what this is, and of course it turned out to be a Twitter login page. And then I got like a phone call. Stuff happened. I stopped thinking about it, and 3 days later, because when I was back then, I would actually log on to Twitter using the browser. I wasn't using the Twitter app on my phone. And I don't know, like 3 days later, I go to sign back into Twitter, and I'm not even thinking. I bring up the browser app, and Twitter, and I just go ahead and put in my login credentials, and then I find out, someone told me, oh, you were just phished. I go, what? And then I thought about it and realized, whoa, like I didn't think about it because I had, I left it for 3 days and then came back later and, put in my credentials into the page I knew was a phish, but didn't close it or think about it because I ended up getting so busy. So I think that was the one time I've ever fell for a phishing attack. I had many attempts all the time for people to try to social engineer me. I remember one case, I was in Canada, and somebody called me from AT&T. They were spoofing the AT&T number, but quite quickly I worked out that it obviously wasn't AT&T, and I just told the guy, hey, good try again. But it reminds me, this is the best one. So it reminds me, as I was hired to test a mobile operator, and so what I did is I first targeted the stores, because those are the easiest. Usually you don't target customer service because they're trained about this type of stuff, but usually the representatives in the individual retail outlets are not trained. And so I called this retail outlet, and I was just, remember the trust sandwich I was mentioning earlier, getting innocuous information first. So the guy answers the phone, and I say, what store number is this? And by the way, who's the manager of the store? Because then I could leverage that information in calling a different store. And the guy goes, who is this? And I go, this is Jerry. This is Jerry over in IT at HQ. He goes, I don't really know who you are. And I go, yes, okay. Then I could see that this guy is not going to be cooperative. And I say, okay, so what's the store number? He goes, well, I can't give you any information. And I said, the store number is public information. Like, I'm not asking anything that's not public. I mean, what's the problem here, guy? I started to get annoyed at him. He goes, well, I just recently read this book called Art of Deception, and I don't trust any phone calls. And he goes, yeah, it was by this guy named Mitnick. And I couldn't tell him that I was really the guy. So I said, okay, thank you very much, hung up, and I did the same thing to a different retail outlet, and it worked. But
that's awesome.
The guy actually read my book and shot me down within about a minute. So, so that was a crazy story. I actually had to tell a client about that. I don't know if they ever told the guy that I actually called.
Oh yeah, you should send him a note sometime. So, why don't we? There's a couple other fun questions that are coming in, kind of on
Sure.
process and methodology side of things. From your perspective, since you do this for a living right now, what's your favorite strategy or method to get key information?
Well, a lot of it is doing very detailed OSINT. Like, for example, we're getting like some malicious. You hear about this in the news where there's a recent attack where you might receive an email and the attackers already checked the recent password leaks for your credentials that you've used somewhere before, and they'll use that as credibility. And there's one attack that's going around that said that basically states we've identified your visiting porn sites. We've actually secretly turned on your webcam, or we recorded your activity here, and if you don't want us to publish this information, we're going to need payment. And then it goes on to say that if you do want verification, that's no problem. We'll be happy to send you part of the video clip, but we're also going to send it to 8 of your friends on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, yeah. So it's where they're, tricking, obviously deceiving the target by having evidence of credentials they used before. And if the person's not aware, they're going, oh my God, maybe they're the type of person that visits these sites, and oh my God, this person does have my password, and it could have happened, and they fall for the attack. But my favorite strategy is really doing really in-depth research on the target.
Yeah.
Really being really meticulous at doing the research, and then being able to carry out the attack. I prefer, because I'm pretty good at it, is doing it over the phone. In other words, actually calling the target, because I have pretty much immediate response. I know if it's going to work or not. I don't have to wait for them to answer an email. Or, in a lot of cases, we still do phishing attacks because that's what our clients want us, to obviously test is, are we susceptible to social engineering through phishing? So key information, like, how do we obtain OSINT information? Like, I could share a couple of cool things. In fact, I'll share my screen here, and
do that while you're booting up your screen. Let me just peel back for the uninitiated on the call. OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence Gathering, and that's a term you'll hear very commonly as people are building profiles of companies or people that they want to social engineer or hack. So that's where that term comes from. The other thing that you started to mention is that your favorite thing is just to get somebody on the phone, and so that whole pretexting piece comes in because of the immediacy behind that, and the fact that you can use more emotion or start to build more trust or credibility within that pretext, and I imagine that works just as effectively, if not more, than phishing.
Yeah, exactly. So here, for example, if I'm calling a target and I need their mother's maiden name, for example, or if I'm calling the target's bank, which you have to be careful of because you do not want to violate the GLBA and this sort of thing. But people use, or if you're targeting a person and you have their mother's maiden name, you could probably leverage that in the attack to gain credibility, right? And how easy is it to do? You could simply go to a website, and this website I think is paid, and it costs like $60 a year, and it's open to the world. And I could put in famous actor like Leonardo DiCaprio, and I'll put it here, and I'll go ahead and do the search. And what it does is it queries birth records, and here we have Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor in Catch Me If You Can, and we see that his mother's maiden name is Indeber. So you could do this with several states, because several states have open birth records. And of course, now the attacker has your mother's maiden name, and they can leverage that for the attack. But normally in phishing attacks, where the attackers go is they go to LinkedIn. That's one of their favorite places, because you can search on a company name, you can search on individuals that have positions within that company, and then you can actually build a target list. But if you're just, wanting a broader view of the person, you can go to the site called People, PIPL.com. I mean, there's so much to this. A guy named Michael Brazel has a whole site that's dedicated to doing, this type of research. But here I want to go ahead and try their live demo. That's
inteltechniques.com, right?
Yes, exactly. So he actually publishes a lot of different techniques. But the whole idea is the attacker wants to figure out how can they contact you? What's your email address? What's your phone number? And how could they send you things in the post, right? So the 3 different ways they could actually communicate with you is important, and then getting other details and that sort of thing. But here, if I put in somebody like myself, because I know if the information is accurate, so let me do that. It's not going to come up pretty, by the way, because it's using this API, but one second. I'm not paying attention to what I'm typing into. Okay. So I put in Kevin Mitnick, for example. Now, I don't know if I actually should share this with the world, but since my information is already out there, why not? So basically,
Right.
you get a free API key to try this out, and then you basically submit the request. And here we come back. Let me try to put this up here. And then we come back with a bunch of data. And a lot of this is surprisingly right. Like, here's my office number, the 702 number. Here's one of my phone numbers. Some are not related to me. But here you get all my previous addresses. Like, here's an address I have in Las Vegas. You'll get my email address. You'll get my phone number. You'll know what, like, I use LinkedIn and this sort of thing. So by doing a simple web search, you can get a ton of data, right? So people.api, people.com/API is just one of the tons of resources out there to get data on a target: personal cell phone number, office phone number, addresses that they're at, social networks that they belong to, and this sort of thing. One of my also favorites is, let's see here, is password leaks. Is, what I was mentioning earlier, remember about the story about these bad guys trying to leverage the knowledge of your previous passwords to convince you to fall for the ransom attack. Well, here you can go, this site is on Tor, and people can see the onion address here. And this guy set up a database where you could simply search on anybody's email, a domain, and that sort of thing, and see individuals. So if I was targeting an individual, I could put in their email address. If I knew a previous password, I could put out there. So I could put that in the search box. So let's say I'm interested in attacking HP, Hewlett Packard. Maybe what I want to do is see what passwords HP employees have used. So let me do a search. Takes a second because it's not such a great, this is not too optimized a database. But as I scroll through, there's going to be a lot of noise in this database, but there's going to be legitimate employees. Let me see if we can possibly find one here. Probably, oh no, Abby Moore here, right? This one, Abby Moore. So let's say, I have one of Abby's previous passwords that's been leaked. What I could do is I can, possibly make a pretext phone call to Abby at her desk and say, hey, Abby, this is, John over in help desk support. And what we're doing is we're securing, people not choosing weak passwords. In fact, on the system here, I see you've used the password, Renter1A before, right? And that's going to be like, oh, yeah, you're right. I remember that password of using that. That person's probably not going to think about, did I use that elsewhere, like on LinkedIn, right? They're going to think, oh, that it's just going to be a memorable password, and that's going to build credibility for the attacker, and then the person will likely follow through with whatever the attacker wants. So that's how we could leverage, like, these password breaches, and it could be leveraged in so many different ways. And this stuff is public. So this is kind of, what we call open source intelligence, and using these tools to find data on our targets, again, to build a good story, to build a good pretext that they're likely going to fall for.
Right. Well, and just a side note on these password dump sites. The funny thing is just because of the datedness of a lot of these passwords, people tend to just, due to their bad password hygiene, they'll not use the same password when they rotate for maybe a couple of years if they're trying to be secure, but they might go back to a password they used 4 years ago thinking that that's safe to use. But that's the exact password that's going to be in these breach sites. So it's just a funny conundrum that they put themselves in by thinking that because that's dated, it's no longer going to be valuable.
And it's so true, because I have clients I test, and I see password patterns that people use over time of doing the tests on an annual basis, that I'll even tell a client, hey, make sure everyone changes the password. They change their patterns because we know it all. And then when we're hired the next year to retest, I already know the pattern. So that's the first thing I'll try, because I'll tell the client that's what we're going to do. And it's usually 80% that it's going to work. Like, there's one client that this guy liked the Dodgers, the LA Dodgers, and then would put a 2-digit number afterwards, right, which was a year. So it was like probably a birth year. So it really limits the entropy of what the password's going to be, because people are so likely, because we're all human, to use patterns. That's why you need to use a password manager, but I don't want to go into password managers right now. But your creativity goes out the window when you're trying to choose your own passwords, because as a human, you can't remember that many.
Right.
So
Right.
you remember a pattern, you don't remember the passwords.
Yeah, exactly. So before we get too much further, we had a question come in. Somebody's asking if you can social engineer them a Lamborghini. What do you think about that? And if so, I've got some things I'd love to get as well.
I think I know who that is. I think that guy needs to get more gigs and to buy a Lamborghini.
Nice. Okay, so we pushed that one
John.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple people asking, what's the craziest thing you ever did on a social engineering gig?
Oh my God. I mean, I told this story in my book, Ghost in the Wires, and I'm going to try to be brief here because I don't want to, run out of time. But essentially, I was a kid, and we entered a phone company central office in Los Angeles like at 1 a.m. And our intent was really, we want to see inside the phone company and see what it looks like. And we were so excited. And I was able to get the door code to this, it was called the Sunset Gower Central Office in Los Angeles. And my friend and I were just walking through, checking out everything. And then all of a sudden I get a voice behind me. Who are you? Like, what are you doing here? And I turn around and it's like this big security guard, looked like an NFL football player. And I go, then my social engineering instinct kicks in. Hey, I'm Steve. I'm over from the Cosmos Center. I'm just taking my friend here on a tour. He's never seen the phone company before because we just finished a movie. So I just, took a tour. We'll be done in about 10 minutes. He goes, where's your ID? Oh, hold on 1 second. I go to get my wallet out. I left it in the car. I could go run and get it. I'll be right back. And I'm like Robert De Niro, right? Because my butt's on the line. So I'm really, my heart's beating super fast. I think it's going to jump out of my chest, but I had to play it very cool. So he goes, you come with us. So he brought us up to like a floor, and there's several other individual employees there, and I had to retell the story. And I said, yeah, I work in the Cosmos Center. I work for Ellen. I work in this building. And yeah, I have my ID in the car. I could go run and get it. Everything's cool. And then all of a sudden, when the guy goes, we're going to call Ellen. I go, hey, it's 2 in the morning. By that time it was like 1:32 in the morning. I said, I wouldn't call her. You're going to wake her up. And they did it anyway. So they called this supervisor that was supposedly my supervisor. They get her on the phone. They're saying, we have Steve here that's in our building at 2 a.m. and we're just trying to verify he's one of your employees. And I go, hey man, let me talk to Ellen. Let me talk to her. So they actually hand me the phone. And I go, hey Ellen, how you doing? This is Steve. I'm really sorry these guys woke you up, and I'm taking out my friend, Jake, on this tour. And she's going, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And I'm pressing the phone really hard to my ear so the people in the room can't hear her going like, who are you? Who are you? And I'm just acting like I have a conversation with you. Yeah, well, next time I'll go through proper process. And I know we still have that meeting on Tuesday and everything. And I'm really sorry these guys woke you up. It won't happen again. I apologize. And again, she's going, I don't know who you are. Who are you? And she's getting more agitated. Then I go, okay, have a good night, Ellen. And then I go over and I hang up the phone. I hang it up and I look at these guys and I go, satisfied, right? And they actually look at each other because it
Total
doesn't
confusion.
seem comfortable. Sure. Yeah, it doesn't seem comfortable. But then I just told her. Then I go on because I could see that uncomfortable thing. I said, listen, I'll be about 15 to 20 minutes max. I'm gonna, take this guy on the rest of the tour, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. And I just say, come on, Jake, and I walk away. Right? Go right to the elevator. Of course, I don't finish the tour. We get the hell out, and and that's how I social engineered my way out of the scariest situation because I would have been in big trouble. Yeah.
So in that case, I mean, it was successful, at least in that you were able to run, in that you leaned into the situation and you didn't freak out. You pressed into it a little bit more, and you relied on the unknown because these people don't know what's being heard. You relied on the ambiguity of the situation to give them enough time to try to process while you got out of Dodge.
Exactly, and this is why phone social engineering works so well. Is it's very deceptive, and sometimes when you're when you're doing these pretexts in person, it's a lot harder. I know a lot of security experts that can't really be persuasive over the phone because they hesitate. They can't, in their own mind's eye, it's very uncomfortable to lie. For me, it's like becoming an actor. So I put myself into the moment. I'm really this person. I'm really having this situation. So I could become very believable, just like an actor on television or in a movie. And this is how it works so well. But a lot of people have a hard time doing this in person and on the phone. So, but this, again, headhunters, people that are private investigators do this type of social engineering all the time.
Right, right. So we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to be cognizant of time. Briefly, where do you see this going in the future? Are there different types of attacks or different things that we need to be worried about when it comes to social engineering? Paint a brief picture, and then we'll get to some protection techniques and questions.
Well, I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be automated, more automation in the future with AI and with bots, where threat actors actually use technology to carry out attacks on scale. And don't forget, even if several of the targets don't fall for it, because they're doing it at such scale and they're doing it for profit, it doesn't really matter. And I was really amazed by this technology that Adobe developed, and it was the ability to get a sampling of somebody's voice and then being able to now speak in that person's voice. And I don't
there's a
think
great
they're
YouTube
ever going to
video
release
of
the
that.
technology. Yeah, a fantastic video. And can you imagine if any type of attacker gets this technology, even steals it from Adobe, because I could imagine Adobe could be the victim here. They steal this technology and they leverage it in attacks, and now anyone could become anyone they want to be on the phone with the same voice. How lethal will that be?
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be
Photoshop
surprised
of audio.
Photoshop of audio. So I could become Perry Carpenter, and
Absolutely.
I sound exactly like you. Who is not going to believe it? Right?
Right.
Everybody would fall for it. So I think, wow, if this technology becomes available in the public domain, we have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, and we do have pieces of that are leaking out through competitors to Adobe, and they're coming close. They don't have the nuance that the Adobe product had, and that was 2 years ago at this point. And then on the video side, we've got things like deepfake that really, I think, started kind of in the porn industry, but has started to be used in political disinformation and everything else as well. And they're getting much more natural on the video front. So if you combine all those technologies, you kind of have really the gold standard of what the future of social engineering could become. Then you add AI on top of that, from just the ability to respond using machine intelligence and potentially take the human out of the equation at some point of this before you get somebody that's going to be on the hook, and then you could assist that piece. So why don't we spend a couple minutes on protection? There's a funny question that came in where somebody's asking, knowing what you know now, does this make you an extremely cautious person, even when going to the bathroom?
Oh, that reminds me. I was doing a security test for a very large financial institution, and they had these hid access card readers. So basically, you use a proximity card to enter into a facility. And I was actually breached the building and got to the floor, and I didn't have an access card to get into to their offices. So I actually hid out in the bathroom in a stall, and when some guy went to go do his business, I stood next to the guy with a device and was able to remotely read his access card credentials as he's, again, as he's taking care of his business. So when you talk about the bathroom, you could actually be the victim in the bathroom, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm extremely cautious. I operate from a very healthy dose of paranoia, because I'm definitely a target. There's no doubt behind that. And because I know how this works. I've been dealing with it since the 1970s, and I'm extremely careful. In fact, when I'm browsing the internet or doing things, I'll use virtual machines. Not that somebody some clever attacker could use a virtual machine escape and compromise the host. But I try to make it harder for the attacker to compromise me. And that's not to say I'm like everybody else. I could be compromised just as you. And unfortunately, when you have a healthy dose of paranoia, it could slow down what you ordinarily do in life. It could slow down productivity at work. So you really have to balance it out. How paranoid are you going to be against, how paranoid are you going to be so you don't fall victim to these attacks? And you don't want to go too extreme, else you'll never get anything done.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we've touched on a couple things. We might want to end off with a little bit of a demo, because people are talking a lot about 2FA and everything else when it comes to their organizations, and you've talked before about how to bypass that. So we've seen that, and there's YouTube's videos of that we can link. But you were, I think last night, up a little bit late, just talking about some other hardware things that are going to be more prominent as we go forward too. So do you want to go ahead and talk about that video while I get it set up?
Yeah, really quick. So back in 2014, a good friend of mine, Karsten Knoll, came out with this attack called the bad USB attack. And what this attack essentially was is, when a victim would plug in a USB into their machine, that USB would magically turn into a HID device. So what's a HID device? That's like a keyboard. So if you now have a keyboard attached to your computer, well, it could inject keystrokes. And those keystrokes could do bad things like download malware, add a user account, depending if you have admin rights and this sort of thing. So, over the years, a lot of people have exploited Karsten's research to come up with cooler attacks. In fact, I know of a security company that was really adept at weaponizing this bad USB idea into a mouse. So they would actually send victim companies, new mice and this sort of thing. But it's recently come to my attention that people have even went further with this and developed a cable. So imagine you have a USB cable to use to charge your phone, or whether it's micro USB, whether it's a lightning cable, whether you use a Mac or Windows, and simply the cable is the attack. So when the victim plugs in the cable, and it can be used different triggering mechanisms. We could use time as a trigger that triggers after a certain time. You could also trigger it over other types of technology like Bluetooth or GSM and this sort of thing. And now the victim, might have a power supply plugged in, constantly, or they might get a present in the email, not in the post, or somebody might have physical access to the office and could, replace the cable. There are many different ways of getting the cable there, but people don't think the cable is the threat. So last night I filmed a demo of using this cable attack that the particular cable I'm using in this demonstration was developed by this brilliant engineer, Olaf, in Shenzhen, China. So why don't we cue the video and give people a sense of what to look out for, because I think it's really important to be aware of this.
Absolutely. We'll cue this, and then we'll come back and then say some final thoughts, and then we'll be done for the day. So guys, stay tuned. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Kevin Mitnick, KnowBe4's Chief Hacking Officer, and I have something super exciting to show you, and you need to be aware of this new vector of attack. Back in 2014, a good friend and brilliant security researcher, Karsten Knoll, released what we know as the bad USB attack. In fact, Karsten gave me the original bad USB 4 years ago. And how this attack worked is the victim would plug this into their computer, and it would become an HID device, which is a keyboard, and then this device would actually inject keystrokes onto the system, and it could do things like download malware and that sort of thing. And this has been around for 4 years, so it's kind of dated, but security researchers have exploited Karsten's work to do cool things. And what are those things? It's, for example, weaponizing a computer mouse that uses a USB with the same technology to inject keystrokes. And most recently, and this is a little bit scary, they've done it simply with a cable. So here we have a micro USB cable. I actually have two others. I have a lightning cable, I have a USB-C to USB-C cable, and it does exactly the same thing. So when the victim simply plugs in the cable to charge a device, it actually does the same thing that the bad USB does, injects keystrokes, and takes over their computer. So let me show you how that works. So let me show you how this cable attack actually works. A friend of mine, Olive, in Shenzhen, China, actually designed this new cable, and this looks indistinguishable from an ordinary micro USB cable. So what we're going to do is take a look over here. We have a Windows 10 laptop with the latest security updates and antivirus definitions. Over here on the right, we have the attacker computer, and we're connected to a remote access Trojan listener in the cloud. So let's go ahead and plug in the cable. And by the way, I've weaponized this to immediately inject the keystrokes. Ordinarily, we triggered on some other event. So let me go ahead and plug it in. Plug in the cable. Let's watch the screen for a moment. Here we go. The keystrokes are being injected by the cable, or by the technology in the cable. And there we go, it's injected. And over here on the right, we should see the Trojan connect, and here it is. So what that means is the attacker has full control of this laptop because the cable actually infected it. And this cable actually works. So if we plug in a hotspot to charge, the green light will come on showing that it's actually charging. So the cable actually works. So this is kind of scary because now your enterprise could be affected simply by a malicious cable.
All right, we're back. So really interesting use of something that seems ordinary to do something extraordinary. And I think, again, that goes back to principles of magic and misdirection and deception. So a good way to end off today. Kevin, do you have any final thoughts or things that you want to leave the audience with? Oh, Kevin, are you still there or are you on mute?
I was actually talking on mute. Thank you, Barry.
No worries. We'll edit that out in post.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm talking and okay. Anyway, you know, we're really on the defense side, and I think that's what everybody here is really concerned about is, you know, how they defend their organization against these type of attacks. And I really think it's about layering training, layering simulated attacks and security technologies to obviously mitigate risk. So, for example, when we're discussing the phone-based social engineering, that sort of thing, and phishing, you know, you really have to make everybody in your organization aware of these types of scams. And when they're aware, they're going to be less likely to, you know, fall for it. And I think the way to create that teachable moment is through simulating these attacks, simulating simulating phishing attacks, simulating pretext phone calls, getting the human factor to become, you know, very aware of what these scams are, you know, and then they have that aha moment, and then obviously layering technologies to mitigate risk. Like, for example, in your organization, you know, if a user falls for the attack and an attacker's on that machine, you know, how do you prevent lateral movement? How are you doing segmentation inside your company to make it more difficult for the bad guy to compromise other things? A lot of attackers use PowerShell as part of their payload. You know, companies could set up a host-based firewall rule that only, you know, that PowerShell could only talk to internal IP addresses. It can't talk to the outside world. And there's so many different things that we can get into in a later webinar, more on what strategies and what specific defenses that enterprises and small and SMBs and, you know, even consumers need to think about to not become the next victim.
Right. Yeah, and the last thing that I would say as we wrap up, and Kevin, thanks for participating today. This has been a lot of fun for me and an honor for me. So, you know, my last thought here is, again, humans are inherently really powerful computing machines, and we're really smart. We get a lot of stuff done, but at the same time, the way that we're wired leaves us open to a number of vulnerabilities. And so one of the passions that I have, and I know that one of the passions that Kevin has, is making sure that people are aware of these vulnerabilities so that we can create a combination of the right information and then the right behavioral science and behavior correction in order to start to move people into more secure patterns of behavior. So with that, thanks so much, Kevin, for joining us. I appreciate everyone who dialed in today and who's going to listen to this on the recorded version, and we will talk to you next time.
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank everybody. And remember the quote by John F. Kennedy that man is still the most extraordinary computer of all. So I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to next time. And thank you again.
All right. Thank you.